Hello, my name's Andy, I'm the Ginger Gamer. Welcome to episode 1, all about my first park, Prehistoric Forest. Before I take you around the park, I think as it is the first episode on the channel, I'll introduce myself. I've been playing video games for years and years. I'm quite old. I started with Defender and Space Invaders on arcade machines and BBC Micros, and then progressed through a variety of Sega consoles, including Master Systems and Mega Drive and Sega Saturns. I've wasted lots of hours playing Virtua Racing on Mega Drive and lots of hours playing Sega Rally on the Saturn. I then progressed to the PC, where I played Doom, inevitably, and also Quake. And Quake was interesting, and it kind of started me towards where I've ended up now, really, in that I did quite a lot of modding for Quake. And I'm sure, as you know, modding is taking a game and doing bits of coding, creating new artwork, building levels, to turn it into maybe something else. And when I played and modded Quake, I made a mod called Raptors, which, as you can guess, had lots of raptors running around in it. It wasn't very good. I also made a third-person action-adventure game called Lunkin's Journey, the star of which was a goblin, so very different to the original Quake. Now, the final mod that I never finished had a working title of Earthquake, and the second park that I'm currently making now owes a fair amount to that mod, which I'll talk about more in the next episode. Anyway, there's a brief introduction to me, and now we'll move on to my first park. Now, this is the, I don't know if you could really say it's an utterly complete park, but it was my first real foray into making something reasonably coherent. I'd obviously played around a little bit with Prehistoric Kingdom. Now, I probably should also say that I've previously played Jurassic World Evolution 1 and 2 and Planet Zoo, which are both wonderful games. They're all wonderful games. But there's something about Prehistoric Kingdom that I think is a kind of best combination of both of those games. It gives you the freedom to be really creative, whilst having dinosaurs, which, what more could you want? Well, mammoths really, but we get them too. It's a great game for all of its bugs and for all of the fact it's not complete, being an early access game. It's great. Now, for this first park, I was kind of basing it on something called Centre Parks, which if you come from Britain or Europe, you'll know is a kind of holiday park. But they tend to be set in forests, and they tend to be all very close together with paths leading through the forest to various places. And I wanted to kind of recreate this in Prehistoric Kingdom. Now, one of the things I found when I was doing sandbox parks in Jurassic World, and to a lesser degree Planet Zoo, is I tended to make the exhibits quite big. And actually I wanted to try and make them a lot smaller in this. Now, I dare say, and you'll see this as we go around, that they're not big enough. The exhibits aren't big enough for the animals I'm keeping them in, but that doesn't really matter. Now, the other thing I was aiming for was kind of doing some proof of concept. I wanted to kind of put walkways through exhibits, and you'll see I've done that on a number of the exhibits, and I wanted to have as little in the way as visible fences as possible as well. Right, so this is the entrance, and there's not a lot difference to the base entrance you get when you start a map, except for I've changed it to Prehistoric Forest, as you can see there. But anyway, we'll take a brief look through this entranceway, and you see there's lots of people. They follow the paths, which is great. I like the fact they follow any of the modular pieces as well, not just paths that you lay down. Anyway, this is the opening area, and all I've done is created a small seated area and some plants in some raised beds and toilets and cafes. Right, so here are the two first exhibits that you see. and they're probably the worst in terms of being far too small for the dinosaurs that are in them. But I really like them, I've got to admit. Except this fellow likes to escape, and I don't blame him really, because the exhibit is far too small. I'll just stick him back there now. Right, now that's sorted, back to approaching the first exhibits. Now on the left there's a Scelidosaurus. I'm not going to pronounce all the names properly, apologies if I butcher them. Now that one that you see walking into the water likes to spend a lot of time in the water. I don't know if that's deliberate behaviour or it's a bit of a bug, but it tends to spend a lot of its time submerged in the water. Again, it's a really tiny enclosure and exhibit for it. Now the Dryosaurus is the one to the right, and as I said, it loves to escape. It jumps up on the rocks and onto the roof, but doesn't really ever seem to go much further. When I highlight it, it seems to have quite good comfort ratings and seems happy, but it's clearly too small an enclosure. Now, if we start on the path to the right, we head off in, again, this is me trying to recreate a sort of Centre Parks feel, with the small little wooden walls and rails by the sides of the path, and we come to the first of the really large exhibits with the larger creatures. And this is an exhibit for the Paraceratherium. I love this animal, and I think they've done a really good job with it. I think, as other creators have pointed out, some of its really subtle movements, like the way its ears twitch and twitch independently, and some of its animations are just great. Now, I think this is kind of a large enough exhibit for them, but I've probably got way too many of them in there. They seem to get on fine though. And I think that they're just beautiful animals, and Planet Kingdom makers have done such a good job. Now, basically the idea of this exhibit was just to fit into a corner, but rather than just have a kind of triangular exhibit, I tried to make it with a curved stream, as you can see here. And it's actually got quite a long curved glass fence, which I haven't shown very well here, for people to take a sort of leisurely walk down the whole length of the exhibit. And if we come off next to it, we come to the Smilodon exhibit, which I think seems to be a bit of a favourite with most creators. What older people like myself would call a saber-toothed cat. And this is the first example of me putting a walkway into the exhibit, really. Now, obviously, this wouldn't hold up in real life, and may well not hold up in the future once guests become more nervous around the animals and animals start to look on the guests as maybe prey items, because the Smilodon could clearly leap over to that walkway if it wanted. I originally made a glass walkway through the exhibit. Some people have done successfully. I didn't manage it, and the Smilodons were forever getting inside it and the people were getting out of it, and it didn't work really well. But anyway, what I've ended up with, I think it's quite a nice exhibit. Like most of the exhibits, I use a lot of rock around the exhibit with small gaps for glass viewing fences, really, and a walkway all the way through the exhibit. Yeah, now the Smilodons seem to be very happy in their exhibit. They have good ratings. I'm not sure how accurate they all are. We'll see over time how much that kind of gets more difficult as time goes on and the game improves. And again, I think the animation on the cats is really good. The animal models themselves are really, really good. Sometimes there's a few little glitchy movements, but by and large, I think it's excellent, and I think they're quite impressive. They occasionally do some quite strange behaviour in that they'll run for no reason, which I'm not sure why they're doing that, but it's all good. Next to them is another enclosure. It looks very similar. Lots of rocks around it, and again a walkway into the enclosure. And we come into the exhibit for the Mammothus, or mammoth, and Coelodonta, or woolly rhinoceros. Again, wonderful models, wonderful animations on a lot of these. Like elephants in lots of games, though, I think sometimes some of the animations when they're sort of turning around on the spot, especially if they're in a tight space, looks a bit janky, but by and large really, really good, really, really impressive. And again, I've got the walkway, and I think this maybe will be a walkway that, even as the AI for the guests and the animals improves over time, it's a walkway that might be able to stay put, which isn't the case with lots of the walkways. Now I've put a little stream through this exhibit, and the other side of the stream I've got some treats, and this was really to experiment with how you can bridge across and whether the animals will use bridges. So the only way they can really get across is across that brick bridge there, the rock bridge, and that does work kind of well, and they kind of found it out and sourced it and used it really quickly, which was great. Now, we tend to associate woolly mammoths or woolly rhinoceroses with quite cold environments, and I must say, looking at other people's parks, they probably do look better, but I kind of was quite consistent throughout this park with just having one type of environment really, which was a kind of temperate grassy environment. I didn't really go for snow or a wintry look. They seem to be okay though. Now I imagine that the rhinos and the elephants probably would get on together, and you would be able to keep them together, especially if the environment was large enough. But again, as we get more sophisticated AI with the animals, we might see whether that's true or not over time. Certainly the latest update will indicate to species specific behaviour, so it'll be interesting to see what the makers of the game do with that. Swinging away from there, we come past, and again I've got a couple of toilets and cafes. I haven't done anything with the buildings really, I've kept them as they are, straight out of the pack really. And as we whiz down here, we come back to looking at some more dinosaurs after looking at the mammals, and this is the Brachiosaurus enclosure, and this is definitely another one that's too small, but again I really like it. Now I was experimenting with this one with a walkway within a building that would put guests at the head height of the Brachiosaurus, and we'll see that in a minute, and it's actually quite easy to do. I think you can just see that in the distance at the back there, where that Brachiosaurus is heading. When they get down to that area, because the enclosure slopes downwards, their head's pretty much at guest height, as it were. And again, apart from the size of this enclosure, I think this would probably hold up quite well with sort of more stricter behavioural and comfort issues for the animals. Now, the Brachiosauruses do like to fall asleep against trees or against the side of the enclosure, and I don't know if that's just because there's not enough space or because that's what their behavioural code tells them to do. Yeah, and this is the view from inside that glass fronted building. It's not very sophisticated design, to be honest. I'm not really great at buildings, and I'll talk about more about that in a bit. And that's kind of the view you'd get as a guest of the Brachiosaurus. And I have got tool feeders up by the entrance to kind of, by the front of that building to tempt the Brachiosaurus there to feed. Moving on from there, we'll go back to the start, and we'll this time go left. And again, down this little walkway, again it's kind of Center Parks-ish. And we come to the Triceratops enclosure, and again this is an enclosure with a walkway through it. And again, this is a really tiny enclosure for the animals that are in it, and I think you do get a sense of how big Triceratopses actually are. They're really quite large, and I've probably got too many in here, but again they've all got good comfort ratings. Now, I think because of where it's positioned in the park, guests don't tend to come through here very often. I don't think that's because there's anything wrong with the design or they're nervous to, because it's really similar to the other enclosures with walkways, so I don't think that's got anything to do with it. I think it's just where it is in the park. Guests tend to go past it. They don't seem to see a reason for going into it. Again, the Triceratops models are excellent. I think they're really good. The different skin colours we've got, which if you've seen the latest dev vlog, you know that skin textures and colours are just only going to get better with mutations and stuff over time. So, you know, it's going to be a lot that we're going to be able to do creatively, not just with the enclosures, but with the animals themselves and how we situate them in the enclosures. Now, not only do they eat away at the food that you put down for them, they tend to eat away where there's plants. And again, I don't know if they get any nutrition from that or whether that's just a kind of AI behavior. I'm not sure. Now, next to the Triceratops, we come to the T-Rex enclosure. And again, I've got a very similar building to the Brachiosaurus building, which doesn't quite put you at head height, but does give you a good view of the T-Rexes and an area where they come down to drink. Again, I think this enclosure's probably going to be a little bit small, but as it stands, they don't tend to bother. I really love the T-Rex drinking animations. I think they've absolutely nailed this, and I think it looks really good. I must say the animals in the game, I don't know how the coding works, they tend to find all the key features really quickly when they're put into an exhibit. They find where the water is and the food is, and they seem to navigate their way around the enclosures quite quickly. They seem to learn them pretty speedily. They do seem to like to go to sleep quite a lot and lie down, which I think is fine. But as the makers have told you, you know, they're really enhancing all of the animal behavior systems, and I can't wait to see the changes. To be honest, it's going to be really good. Now, the T-Rex also has a walkway through the enclosure, and I don't think there's any people walking through it during this video, but they do walk through it. But as we kind of know, the guests don't really have a fear response to the animals or know when things are a little unsafe in the same way they do maybe in Jurassic World or Planet Zoo as of yet. And the dinosaurs don't really hunt the guests yet. But it will be really interesting to see when I load this map up in the future, when as things develop, to see what happens with this particular setup, because I have kind of put the guests at a good biting height for the T-Rexes. I must say T-Rexes are one of my favourite dinosaurs, along with Stegosaurus and Triceratops. Right, moving on from the T-Rex enclosure, we come down to probably the enclosure that's the worst one I made, which is the Iguanodon enclosure. And I think the Edmontosaurus, I think I kept them in. And I wanted to make a kind of quite marshy environment with a really long walkway, which I did do. I think it's probably too marshy. I think there's probably too much water and it's a bit of a mess. Guests do walk all the way through it. I mean, once you get into the walkway, you're kind of committed and you have to walk all the way around. I think it would be really cool to actually have an animal exhibit of what, you know, even to animals that we have today, an exhibit like this where you walk through the enclosure. I think that would look really cool. I don't think I quite nailed what I was trying to achieve with this enclosure, but I still think it looks pretty good. And yeah, guests walk through it and the animals seem pretty happy. Now on the other side from that, I have a few cafes and restaurants and things like that. And actually, I'll change my mind. This is the worst enclosure I've made on the whole. This is the Coeliophysis exhibit, and they're masters escapists. escapists, although I've made it kind of easy for them with this exhibit. Now it backs onto the T-Rex exhibit, and I found them inside the T-Rex exhibit on numerous occasions, which is quite funny. They seem to be really happy in the exhibit. They just seem to like escaping. I think that's just the way they're coded at the moment. But I've basically made it really easy for them. And again, I was just filling up space. Right, here's some bonus footage that I took. And this will be... Well done, Rexy. The T-Rex having a good roar at nothing. I wanted to catch him roaring with a person walking through the walkway, but neither the T-Rex or the guest played ball, really. Now, my thoughts on the game. I love the game. I'm really into this kind of game for sandboxing rather than campaigns. And it just allows you to do almost anything. There's some frustrations I have with the game when I'm editing, especially when I'm doing quite small things, that sometimes it's really hard to position the camera where you want it. I don't know if that's just me, but yeah, all in all, I really like the game. I think it's so promising. I know it's been in production for a long time, but I think it's a smaller team than most of this type of game has, and I'm really happy to be really patient with them and give them as much time as they need, really. I love creating for it. Now, I will talk in a bit about what the next park is going to be. Before I do, I'd just like to thank you for watching. If you've got this far, please subscribe if you've enjoyed it. Please like the video, all that sort of stuff. I think for a first park, this isn't too bad. Again, I was just trying to get to grips with building things and making things and a few ideas I had. It's not really meant to be a really coherent finished park. Yeah, so what I wanted to do is get better at making buildings, because I haven't really adapted or made any bespoke buildings for this park. So the next park, and the park that will be in the next episode on the channel, is called Prehistoric City. And basically, to get better at making buildings, I've made a whole park full of buildings. And I think that's a good way of learning how to do it. If you'd like to see some of that in production stuff, please follow me on Instagram, where I'm the Ginger Gamer. And I also pop up on the Prehistoric Kingdom Discord, especially on the screenshots. So, yeah. Thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I would welcome any feedback you have, not only about the channel, but also the parks and what I've made, good and bad. I'm really happy for any advice. And I will see you next time.